So today we're going to be reviewing some uh, deck shells, ways that you could have built decks in Brothers War Limited, uh, just to try and focus on the commons and commons that best synergize, had the strongest win rates, helped you be on plan for the different decks that existed uh, within the format. So we'll look at the 10 color pairs with a nod to uh, green maybe being a little more splish-splashy with Sentinel Stalwart, and then a mono red deck that maybe will have like a very light flag splash. So yeah, we'll start with some of the decks that were a little better performing. So we'll go with like white blue, some of the white based aggro decks. So a key point here is trying to have decks that are actually potentially draftable. So max 8 uncommons, no duplicates there. Max 2 of any particular common. And then we're not having any rares or mythics in these, but ideally you'd be able to upgrade it while still staying on plan, adding in those cards. So we think about white-blue. There's a couple of different strategies. There's probably like 3 different strategies. So a lot of this is based on 17 lands from that group, and then Archetypist from Circovitz kind of helped, and then just play experience. But there's a little more on the ground, very soldier-heavy aggro. There's the blue-white skies. We just have a lot of flyers. Maybe you have some defensive speed. And then there's, you've got 1 or 2 big bombs, like a Teferi, like a Portal to Phyrexia, and you're playing a very defensive white deck with a lot of like prison sentences and like 1/4s, 2/5s, gum up the board. And then you just play your bomb and you win with that, with maybe some like counterspell or bounce backup. The most consistent one is, in my experience, the one that leans into a lower curve, on the ground, soldiers focused. But you still have some ways to push through. You might have like Aeronaut Cavalries, which play very well in this deck on a couple different fronts. One gives you some flyers that might be able to go over a stalled out ground board after you've gotten them hopefully fairly low in life. And then it can pump a creature that might be like a Warlord's Elite or like a cohort that can set up some good attacks to kind of get rid of some of the ground stall. And then you also have Air Marshal, which is much more of like a mid-game 2-drop, like drop 1/2, just attack with it, given this a 2/1, but the ability to give flying to like a Warlord's Elite or a cohort is just big game potentially to help you get on that other axis. In terms of your key interaction, so you could have military discipline in here because you are going to be on the ground, and there's nothing wrong with having 1 or maybe even 2 of those in here. It does perform well in the deck. I found the Ron's Escape to be a little bit better just because, 1, it helps against some of the red or black based removal. If you try and establish flying threat, like a paratrooper that is oftentimes a must answer in the mid to late game, or like cavalry, or if potentially you can get in a situation where you're being aggressive, you're being assertive, you're causing your opponent to have to like tap out to put blockers down. Maybe they set up like an awkward double block on like an elite or like a tactician or something, and you can use your 1 mana to save that, and maybe like kill 1 or both their creatures, keep your creature alive, and then drop like another threat after that, or like recommission something back is just huge in terms of being able to double spell, take advantage of your low curve, and ideally, playing to get ahead and then playing to stay ahead. So in terms of playing from behind, if you're playing another aggressive deck, that's one of the ways that Cohort shines. Scrapboard Cohort is great both ways. That's why it's one of the top commons in the set, particularly when you can unearth it. In a deck like this, it does have white as a main color. Is if you're a little behind, you can play it on 4, and you might use your 1/1 to discourage them attacking with like a 2/1 or 3/1. Use your Cohort to trade with like a 2/2, 3/3, something like that. Yeah, you might trade down on mana a little bit, but you're stabilizing. You have something you can still unearth later. You're giving yourself a little bit of a chance to breathe and clear the board out some, or force them to reevaluate their attacks. Maybe only attack like their 1 flyer and keep their ground forces back, which might give you a chance to, use prison sentence or static net on like their flyer and play another threat to try and like catch up and get back ahead a little bit. Um, the breakdown for this is pretty creature heavy. And this one, 18 creature, 6 non-creature. And your non-creatures are predominantly where your interaction is coming from, but there are some other ways to use your mana. So you have a mana seeking, marshal, courier, recruitment officer, and paratrooper, which is huge because you're going to get some power stones here and there probably. In this build, really, you're just looking at like static net for a power stone, but maybe you have like a stern lesson, 2 and a blue draw, and maybe you just find some power stones and some other ways. But I mean that you do have sinks for them, which is nice. Yeah, it's one of the strongest decks in the format, and it's something that can come together really at common. I mean, in terms of uncommons, like yes, Stagnant is great, but the deck can function without it. You would like a Ocean Tactician or two, but the deck can function without that as well. Same with Combat Thresher. You do have some strong 2-drops that you'd like to have. Like you'd really like to have a Zephyr Sentinel to maybe be able to save the creature, give you another flyer. And you could use Thought Decay. It's not as strong as this deck as it might be like blue-red or blue-black, for example, where you might have a little more card draw. But it's still fine. It's something that can maybe trade on turn 2 or 3, and then you get another body out of it you can maybe attack with the Thopter. It's above replacement level for sure. So that's white-blue. And I guess we'll look at white-red next, because that was another top deck in the format. So white aggro is the takeaway is one axis on which you can think about drafting, and right. And this has many similarities to white-blue, except where blue was giving you some interaction in terms of like the bounce and giving you a better gold card on average, and a little bit of way to go to the air. Red says, okay, those are all great, but what we're going to do is give you a different type of closing speed. We're going to say we have strong bull that can do the last 2 points if you need it. You can go to the face with an explosion. You can use your Philology Vanguard to maybe pump a flyer or pump a ground attacker that's going to be a challenge for them to double block, like a Warlord Delete, for example. It plays on that type of axis, and oftentimes can be a little better than blue-white because you just have these like well-costed cards. Like Stoneseeker is great, Cindermaw is great, Wuthering Bolt is great. Like those are all very strong uncommons. You can get it. Greatly increases the power of your deck. You can still unearth through cohorts, in particular if you have a Philology Vanguard. That's 2 plus 2 plus 0 triggers you can put on the same or different creatures. It is a little more reliant on getting the ground damage, which is where cards like Whirling Strike or Military Discipline do come in. And this is a deck, because it doesn't have a way to jump stuff in the air, and 2 Aeronaut's Wings can really play up in this type of deck, because if you can put it on any ground creature and pop that with the Vanguard, or even put it on a 3-1 becoming a 4-1 or a 4-4 becoming a 5-4, it's just huge. And because you do have more Power Stone generation in this type of deck, if you're not using those for your Strong Bull, you can use it again for like your Paratrooper, your Recruitment Officer, doing some of your equip costs or unearth costs for creatures, which is really nice. So you have good interaction. If you're not getting the uncommon interaction, hopefully you can get some good common interaction. And because you're going to be on the aggressive side of things, getting on board and turning sideways, cards like Whirling Strike and Military Discipline do play well. And if you fall a little behind, it's nice to know that you have some card advantage, like your mutts or your cohorts that can trade, and you can earth it to try and catch back up on resources, and maybe your board presence through other cards that are good, like Finding Worth Officer, Elite, Cindermaw, Strong Bull. But yeah, another fun deck that is on the get on board early and pressure advantage with good interaction type of deck. And in particular, the cards that are 2-ofs tend to play very well in the deck, so that's just something to recognize. And that kind of is expected, given these are 2 of the top probably 3 commons, along with Exvasion and Explosion. Okay, I guess we should finish out the white aggro, white mid-range type of deck. So go to white-green next. Okay. I'll say this one plays more in the mid-range space, and a part of that is, while you do have probably the best combat trick interaction in the format in Gaia's Gift, hope you can get a couple of those. Most cards are not as aggressively priced. Like we have, 2 2s and 1 2s at 2 rather than like 3 1s, for example. We have a 3 2, which is good. That can oftentimes attack, though the 2 toughness can be kind of rough. Rather than like a strong board like a 4-3 or a 4-4 that you might have gotten in like white blue or white red. But it still is a deck that can take advantage of artifact fall. If you're fortunate to be able to line up a Ocean Dissonant, then you're going to see some Power Stones come down, some artifacts come down, and you can really just grow your creatures. Same with the Still Seeker, may be able to draw some of those lands off the top of your deck, so you're getting cards into hand and you're drawing action otherwise. So those are good plays when you're thinking more like mid-range. Just establish a board, generate some value, and then grind them out with 2-for-1s or like going to the air. Using your Power Stones for like Mask the Jaycraft or getting a full price Boulder Branch Golem or Combat Thresher. Being able to use Power Stone with Stalwart to be able to cheat something out a little early, or play a good splash and like a Skyfisher Spider to give you a little more hard removal. But yeah, it's a deck that is fine with getting on the aggressive foot if the draw allows it and the opponent is not mess with you as much, but it's probably looking to play more of like a mid-range game. Oftentimes, because you are going to see more of your opponent's cards, you don't necessarily want to like snap off your Confrontation or Prison Sentence or Static Net. From the get-go, you're not trying to get them dead before they can empty out their hand. You recognize that it's going to be a bit more of a slog. And so you have to think, okay, save these for like the flyer I can't really deal with, or the bomb creature, or planeswalker in the case of Static Net. It's a little more challenging. And yeah, you'll notice this has a little more in the 4-drop slot that you might otherwise see, but it's still trying to have at least 8 1s or 2s that can do stuff, and then use this mana in the late game with like Paratroopers, Mask, unearthing creatures, and then Recruitment Officer to get many of these good cards. In particular, late game, you're looking for like a Paratrooper. Try and make your threats just go over your opponents. And white-black is not aggressive generally. It tends to be on the grindy to very grindy side, which is why you do want to make sure you have some true hard removal like Remorse, Static Net, potentially Prison Sentence, to be able to take care of the very challenging cards. And then ideally you're looking to be able to take advantage of the cards that cost 3 or less, and some very good cards that play particular roles higher up. So like Cavalry is something to give you a threat to fly over. If you have 100 Aeronaut Wings, Hero of the Dunes is going to pump the majority of your creatures and ideally bring one of them back. If you can bring back a Chaplain, that tends to be your premium target because it comes back in, military, maybe you can get another 2 or 3 drop with it to your hand to really get a 3-for-1 type of value there. And then you're just trying to trade, to grind, to bring cards back that them be just even better rate. So cards like Mutt that let you find what you're looking for, cohorts that you can unearth to bring back, trade with creatures to stay alive, and then try and finish between in the air and or going wide enough. It might look a little wonky to say, okay, well, we have like Courier or Mutt, and we're not going to be able to unearth those. And that's all right, because you do have recommission if you really do need to bring one of these back. But they're just strong enough cards to be able to say, okay, I'm going to block and then draw a card. If I'm looking for, I'm going to rummage away an extra land and try and find more action. I'm going to use these to tap to get an early Warlords Elite, to try and get in some damage and establish a good presence when it's not able to attack. In particular, because you have some tricks, like you might be able to bring in a Paratrooper or like a Defiance or a Disfigure. It can help some of these, particularly the elites, play up a little bit. This one is not as good as the white, blue, or white, red. And that's just by nature of some other decks being able to sometimes go over the top as you do get into the mid to late game. Because you're really leaning on these like 3 or less out mana value cards that can be good, but can be outclassed by 4, 5, 6 plus mana value cards. The opponent stabilizes. So it's definitely where you want to be if you can help it, but it might be an off ramp if you're seeing your white get cut if you start in white and you're not seeing like red or blue or green really come through. Okay, so that's white. The other end of the spectrum is going to be a little more on the dirtier side, like green, and we'll look at like green X Stalwart in particular. And the general thought process here is, and obviously you would want as many Stalwarts. Well, I wouldn't say as many. You probably want 3 to 4 Stalwarts if you can get them. And oftentimes, if you're in a pod where you are seeing these come around, 6th, 7th, 8th, wheeling, you might be able to do the thing. But the hope or the goal is have low mana value creatures that you can tap with Stalwart to ramp out some of your better cards, and then have as many unearths as you can get, really. Preferentially those that are on the stronger side, like Cohort, Mutt, and Courier. None of them have a green cost in them, but you can play them all for whatever mana because they're all artifacts, and then unearth sort of like your Stalwart or a drum or even like a Chromatic Star comes into play to be able to get more value. So you might potentially mill them with like a Blanchwood Prowler, and you might just play them once and play them again. It's the normal progression of the game. And then because you're going to be generating Power Stones, you find some sync for those. So maybe they're using those for the unearths like we're talking about, and maybe that you're using it for like Mask of the Jade Crafter, using it for Mightstone's animations, using it to tap with your Stalwart, what have you, power out something. You can use the main generation Power Stones late, like Golems or Thresher. So you want to have enough higher end stuff that you can use the main you're generating. And also there's Sprite. Don't forget about Sprite as a good mana sink. You need to be able to get on the board early enough to maybe overwhelm the opponent, get wide. Cards that are not shown but actually oftentimes do go well in the deck is the Paratrooper, 1 and a white for a 1/2. You can sink your mana into pumping your whole team. The third row Savant is alright. It's the 2 and a blue for a 2/3, 5 to draw 2 cards to help replenish so you can get more action late in the game. And then a lot of times this removal is somewhat interchangeable in terms of it doesn't have to be one color if you have enough Stalwarts and drums. But it's a way to just help you push through, respond to threats your opponent have that are otherwise kind of tough. Because you're not oftentimes going to win when turn like 4 or 5 with this deck. You may be able to get a pretty expansive board presence, and then you want to be able to continue to leverage that. And maybe it's being able to put a threat out with that Power Stone that you're not using to tap anymore, essentially. and draw a card with that, or have this interaction, or a big mask. But this was one of the most fun decks, and particularly you can see some stronger uncommons or rares you can splash in, which we're not showing in the deck show. But this is great when you have like, an off-color Gix's command that you fit in with like a swamp, a wild, and like 3 stalwarts, or you have like a harbin, because these are soldiers, for example. Uh, Cards like that that you can generally like just shoehorn into the deck. When playing, and we're not going to talk too much about particular player, but when playing, it's really helpful, uh, if at all possible, to keep the Stalwart alive. So that means like don't attack it into, a plains and open mana and have it die to a paratrooper. Maybe try and leave up your guy's gift if you need to. If you don't have the other 2-drop to play, so you can hit your like 4-drop on turn 3 or something like that. So it's just try and find ways to not have your plane of splashing good cards go down the drain. Part of this is mitigated by having more stalwarts or like a springleaf drum, but it's not always how the cards in the draft goes. So, but yeah, this is a fun deck that can take advantage of strong uncommon rares that you get, being able to splish-splash a little bit, and because you're getting on the board early enough, it oftentimes doesn't get run over. And then if you have 1 or 2 Boulder Branch Golems, cohorts, mutts to be able to have good defensive speed, then oftentimes you can stabilize and then take over against the aggro decks, or be quick enough and have well-cost enough threats to get under some of the more controlling, go big type of decks. So again, other stuff for green. Talk about white green, we talked about green. We said blue because there's a little more blue than our colors there. Guess we can tackle red green and black green. So for red green, the way that I found this to be successful is saying, I'm going to try and attack you on a couple axes. The initial one is get on board and be able to turn things sideways and force you to make blocks that I can punish. And that's with, cards like Gaia's Gift or Giant Growth. And like your Blast Runner that you can make a 3/2 Menace, or your Swift Spear that's tough to block, and our Menace Creature, and Stone Seeker. And just put them on the back foot. And then the like mid-game type of strategy is, okay, we have well-costed threats like 4/4 for 4, 3/2 for 3 that comes with a Power Stone that you can use to sack your Strongbow that can grow from the 2/3. And then good interaction with like particularly Explosion, but also, like I said, Gaia's Gift very good, Epic Confrontation fine. And then be able to replenish, with Mutt to rummage away like an extra land, desk, even Combat Courier. In particular, if you have the multiple Blast Runner build, as a way to sack to pump up, 1 or 2 Blast Runners, and then replenish with another card can be really good. But this is trying to find threats that are well costed. You can just turn sideways and force your opponent to have to interact with, and then punish them for having to block. So it's nothing super crazy, but it's not playing the ramp out to huge, 5, 6, 7 drops. Like you could potentially fit in like a Juggernaut in this type of deck if you have multiple opportunities and explosions and have your Juggernaut come down on 4. Like that is something that you can do here for sure. But you don't necessarily have to. But it isn't like the worst strategy if you're not seeing as many of these like strong 3 drops or really good 4 drop. But you're trying to be proactive and be a little bit bigger than some of the White X decks that might have small toughnesses and be able to just, go through them. And then black-green. So this one tends to have a bit more splish-splash as well. And that's in part because you can get a decent number of unearthed creatures in the grave with cards like Gigamole or Blanchwood Prowler for milling, which means you want to be able to like unearth creatures, for example, so like unearth your cohorts or your mutts or like a desk, um, and then say I'm going to play more of a mid-range game where I get on the board and do some stuff, but I'm counting on some grind from my deck to be able to get some good 2-for-1s. 2-for-1, 2-for-1, oftentimes a 2-for-1, and then take advantage of some good interaction like remorse, gift, moment, to try and punish them into a challenging blocks from your opponent. And then take advantage of your power stones where you can get them to either, power out your unearths or get, 7 mana for some of your big top end that's nice. Yeah, this deck is not quite as strong, and again, some is dependent on, are you able to splish-splash a little bit for just unearth with Stalwart, or do you get some strong uncommon or rares that are maybe a little bit of a splash that you can take advantage of. But you do need your interaction, and you do need some grind. So the mask, the weld, kick them all, being able to unearth creatures can help you push through. And then I have the mountain in this deck for like a desk and a mutt. But I mean, if you have like a rare that you potentially be splashing, you might like an extra land of that color that you can help with Stalwart and Wilds to be able to find. And I will say, Crest does play pretty well in this deck because you're going to have a decent number of artifacts and might be able to ramp with it. It can clear the way for you to maybe get rid of like an opponent's interaction or a strong card like a bomb that might have, because you're going to play more into the mid game with this type of deck. Okay. So I think what's basically left are the blue decks. And I'll say we already looked at white-blue, which is a little more white than blue, but I guess we have these 2 blue decks and like a black-red and mono-red deck. So maybe we'll tackle the blue decks first. Blue-black did not tend to have a very good win rate, but it's a deck that I enjoyed to play, and I think I had a decent win rate with compared to the average, and in part because I treated it a little more like a blue heavy deck with just some black support. In particular, being able to say, how can I best take advantage of Mightstone's animation? And it is, let me find it with Archaeologist and Courier. Let me protect it like a Machine Over Matter if I need to be able to switch them hand if they try and kill the creature. Let me put it on like a Levitating Statue. And those are all useful. And then what plays really well with Mightstone's animation are cards that take advantage of not just having a body that can like cover the ground while you fly over, but also something that can take advantage of the draw. So cards like Thoughts Mechanic, Garganoir, French Stalker, all appreciating to be able to draw a card with the Mightstone to make the card, or even like Evangel Synthesis, just get stronger, be more of a threat. Like this is a 2/4 that can bring back like a mutt or Evangel or like an Archaeologist maybe you blocked with just to get in the graveyard to bring back can be really big. And then you are trying to play a bit of like a trickier game. Like you're going to have interaction that other decks may be able to interact with. So you need to be aware of like trying to get them to tap on their mana and maybe like pick out some of their interaction with like Express. But having Moment of Defiance, Machine Over Matter, Disfigure, cards like that, like Instant Beat Draw that may be able to like bump up creature power. Can really make it a challenge for opponents to be able to cover all the axes you might be able to attack them from. And then yeah, cards that did play well. Obviously there are 2 of like Animation, Defiance. We're showing one almost any artifact like whether you're 1/1 from a cohort to a statue to even like a courier. It's really strong. And oftentimes opponents they might not think about playing around Moment of Defiance, but they probably should because it's just can be backbreaking, particularly against like a aggro deck if you're trying to race them. And they're thinking, okay, well, I'll have my 4/4 ward till you block your animation and play a Moment of Defiance. And now you have a 6/5 animation that doesn't trade with the ward till you gain 6 life. They lose their probably biggest creature, and you really swing the damage race. It can be huge. But yeah, it does try and play a bit more of a tempo game, but it's not so quick that it will be able to really finish the game quickly. So you do get into the mid game, which is where you can take advantage of some of these, like the anointers, the mechanics, or even like a Trench Stalker, cards like that. Now, ideally, you can beef this deck up with something like a Gixis Command or a Skystrike Officer, Teferi, something like that. But this deck can do all right without those. But you have to truly lean into, I'm going to be interaction heavy in at these instances that can do some neat things that can really frustrate the opponent. And then have enough defensive speed with like the couriers, the 03 or 1/4 archaeologists, the cohorts, to be able to fight on that axis as well and not get run over and be able to turn the corner and do your plan. And then blue-red has some similarities, but this tends to be more aggressive slanted. Like, if you can, get some early drops, and then get like maybe you go Courier Blast Runner into like a mechanic, and then you're doing Iconoclast, holding up Machine Over Matter, and be able to like make a 1/1, bounce your Iconoclast, and then maybe take that 1/1 and get a Might Stone's animation on turn 4. Like, you've got interaction in hand, you're pressuring them, you have some reasonable threats, you're drawing cards back up again. And then you can hopefully close the game with some interaction on key pieces that stop you from being able to attack, and then Strongbow to ping them out, Strongbow to give your Blast Runners Menace, Courage to give your Blast Runners Menace, rebuild with your Mutts and your Desk, your Archaeologist. A lot of fun cards to play with. They do synergize fairly well. Now, ideally, you're having more than 1/3 path Iconoclast, and you're just, going wide and like animating those 1/1 artifact soldiers, sacking them after they do their damage, stuff like that. So that's the goal. It does lean into artifacts, does lean into interaction, though it's not as heavy on the instant speed as Blue Black was, because you're really just looking at Machine Over Matter. But there are other things you can do with instant speed, like sacking. You can be able to maybe throw stuff at instant speed. So there's a couple different angles you can play from. And then I guess we have black-red and then mono-red left, and that'll do it for reviewing these decks. So there's a couple different varieties of black-red. It tended to be overdrafted and perform quite as well. That might have been because you can have a very aggressive load of the gray on black-red deck, or you can have a more controlling, like sack, lean into those synergies type of deck. And then there is the true like steal and sack that oftentimes is a little closer with the second deck than the first deck. But the one that tended to perform better was lower to the ground, aggressive, taking advantage of Blast Runners, Mutts, Strombles, and then good interaction with cards like Explosion or Disfigure, even like Moment of Defiance or Remorse as well. Your key card in the aggressive deck is Junkyard Genius. If you can get at least one of those, you have a chance to have some nutty out of nowhere, kill you turns. In particular, if you can play it on turn 6, sack something so you pump up all your creatures, give them all menace, and swing in. You might have like a Strombull or Cindermaw, plus, 1 or 2 Blast Runners, and maybe an Infiltrator that's, like a 4/3 now or something, that are all getting the +1/+1 menace to be able to take an opponent out. But this is a deck where you're not really looking to trade off resources as much. You're trying not to trade a creature for a creature because, yeah, you can maybe bring it back with like a weld, but it really slows you down. Ideally, you're trying to get a bigger board, get some key threats out of the way with like the explosion just figures to push some good damage. Um, Ideally with like Menace Blast Runners or a Strongbow that has threat of activation. And then get them about like 8 or so, and then push through with Menace on like a Junkyard Genius. It doesn't always come together because some of these are a little more popular cards, like the Mutts Explosions, the Blast Runners, but it can take advantage of some cards that might not otherwise be as useful. Like it actually has some roles for Acrobat to sack your Power Stones from like an Explosion or a Stone Seeker to be able to fly over and make your Blast Runners bigger. Your Infiltrators that get bigger when you're sacking, to your Stomper or your Acrobat, or even like a Power Stone Fracture or a Bitter Union. There's some neat synergies, but it just requires some delicacy in the play to not, train too much or trying to get damage and leave them at like 5 and you have no board left and you can't take advantage of a genius or you might be out of artifacts and you can't strong them out. So you just have to be careful. And then the initial boogeyman of the format, before it started getting a little more overdrafted and not coming together as well was mono red. And I say mono red, but this deck could have like a Cliffstopper in it, honestly, and maybe we don't put in these splash lands off of wilds, but this is taking the red black deck we looked at and said, okay, I want to lean more into combat tricks, lean more into sack, really do the Blast Runner, Courier Mutt, Strongbow type of game plan. And just keep attacking. Boring Strike helps you do that a lot. Explosion to clear the way, or even a Sibling Rivalry to take a big blocker out of the way, swing the team. As a way to finish the game with this. The wilds help with the Blast Runners and maybe splashing some Unearth to be able to give you some last oomph with like your cohorts or couriers again. Which is why, if you can, it's not unreasonable and probably good to like a single land if you have 2 or 3 wilds to be able to get them. And even a Refractor can play to be able to help you with an Unearth or sack the Refractor for the Strongbow for last point of damage type of thing. But this only goes one way. Like if you get behind or you run into some bigger creatures, if you don't have like the Whirlwind Strike or the Explosion or the Rivalry at hand, or I guess Bolt, it's tough. You're gonna have to try Menace past them or just build out a wider board. That's kind of where Genius comes in because there's not a great pump. Like I guess there's Miniatures on slot that has +2/+0 if you're not gonna use it to get 2/1s, but and you could play it in this deck, but it's not generally great. Generally, you're helping to get Menace and go around the blockers they've set up to push through the last, 5 to 8 points of damage or so. So yeah, those are decks from Brothers War. I guess when it comes back to Arena, or maybe you do a flashback draft in person, hopefully you can just read this video and feel like you're up to speed on it and can either tackle it from a white aggro side of things, a green Dirtle soup, or like potentially if it's things to be underdrafted, like a blue X, or just interaction based type of strategy. So yeah, happy drafting.